I want to talk a little bit about how to prevent misapplied payments with the IRS. Um, I had to take some notes on this because I want to cover a lot of information here on this video in a relatively short amount of time. So typically, one of the things that causes misapplied or lost payments with the IRS is that the IRS computer system when you're a married couple, the IRS's computer system designates a primary taxpayer and a secondary taxpayer. Now, how do they decide who's the primary and who's the secondary? Well, the primary taxpayer is whoever's name goes first on the first tax return that's filed by that couple as a joint return with the IRS. So I don't care if it's a husband or wife. Traditionally, it's been the husband, but it doesn't matter. But when you first get married, whoever's social security number and name goes first on the tax return, the best advice there is to go ahead and keep that taxpayer, that husband or wife, or husband and wife, I guess, whichever spouse is the primary taxpayer. My advice would be to keep that spouse always the primary taxpayer, because why am I saying this? Why am I making a big deal out of this? Well, when couples switch back and forth the names on the tax return, the order, the IRS computer system gets confused and has a very difficult time matching up a payment made on the secondary taxpayer's account, for example, to the primary taxpayer's account. And a lot of times those payments will either be lost or they'll just be like stuck in this weird limbo where it's very difficult to find them and get them fixed. I have a case right now where the wife was the primary taxpayer. She's actually the one who earns most of the money in the household. And for whatever reason, when they paid their 2023 tax bill, they paid it under husband's social security number. That's bad enough. We can see it on the IRS transcripts. We could see it wasn't on hers, their joint return, but it was like on his. But then when we went to try to get it moved from his to theirs or hers to the primary account, before we could get that done, it disappeared. It wasn't on his primary. It wasn't on his social security number. It wasn't on her social security number. Now, thankfully, in this particular case, I'm probably only going to say this once. Thankfully, there was a revenue officer in this case, and the revenue officer could see it, and the revenue officer is going to fix it. That's the only time I'm ever going to say, thankfully, there was a revenue officer, because typically revenue officers make the case more complicated to resolve. But in this case, we have other issues. He could see the payment, and that's going to get resolved. So my first takeaway here is once you have a primary taxpayer, always use that primary taxpayer. If you're going to make estimated tax payments or other types of tax payments, always use that security or that social security number as the social security number for the payment. If you're going to mail a paper check, which I don't necessarily advise you to do because the U.S. postal system is becoming slower, less reliable, and also you don't get credit for making that payment until that payment is received by mail by the IRS. Now we're seeing transit times in excess of 7 to 10 days sometimes. But if you're going to make a paper check payment, in the memo line, I want you to put the primary social security number, the form, in this case, form 1040, and I want you to put year ending. So like 12/31/2023, for example. I want you to put that on the check, and then I want you to either take a copy or a photo of that check so that if that check is lost or misapplied, you can help the IRS find it again. Okay? Next, the best way to make payments with the IRS is using their system, which is called IRS Direct Pay. If you're going to, the way to find that, how to do that, is to just Google the phrase IRS Direct Pay. It comes right up on whatever search engine you're going to be using. Now, when you make a payment using IRS Direct Pay, you get to choose the name, the social security number. Again, remember to use the primary social security number, the form, the type of form, and the tax period that you want to pay it. Now, that's all fairly common sense, right? But I can tell you this next step is not common sense because time and time again, people don't get this part. Once you've made the payment, there's a screen that comes up that's sort of like a confirmation screen, but it's not the final confirmation screen. And that tells us whose social security number you used, how much was the payment, what was the form, everything. It tells us all of that information. That's the screen that I want you to print out and save. And then ultimately there's a confirmation screen at the very end that just says this transaction number, blah, 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 has been confirmed. Doesn't give us any additional details. So if you had a payment misapplied, I want you to use that IRS Direct Pay system. And I want you to keep those records for your own records, because if the IRS loses that payment and you don't have any proof that you made a $10,000 payment, for example, you really could end up in a situation where that money's lost and can never be found. It always amazes me that large payments can be made to the IRS, misapplied to other taxpayers even, and it's the taxpayer's burden to try to basically try to help the IRS track that money down. If you can't help them efficiently find that payment, then you're just out the money. I've never had that actually occur to me or any of my clients, but I've had some cases where I thought it was going to get pretty close. I would say the rule of thumb here is with the IRS, do less on paper, more electronically. Okay. Incidentally, you should always keep a copy of your tax returns that you file in an electronic format, and then hopefully store them in the cloud someplace so that if you have a fire, flood, hurricane where paper would ordinarily be destroyed or severely damaged or lost, you'll always have a copy of those tax returns, because you never know. I've had cases where I needed tax returns that were 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. It's always a good idea to keep your tax returns forever. What do you do if there's a misapplied payment and you don't want to call Guarantee Mish to help you find it? It's certainly a reasonable decision. What I would suggest that you do is you contact the IRS Taxpayer Advocate Service. You're going to use Google, just Google IRS Taxpayer Advocate. You're going to find your local advocate's fax number, and you're going to fill out Form 911. Get it? A Form 911 is like for emergencies. So in the Form 911, it's biographical information. Who are you? And then there's a section on the form. It's a one-page form that says, what's your problem? I made a payment of X and it's not applied. And then the next question is, what do you want? I want your help tracking down the misapplied payment, and I want you to apply it to the proper tax year. It will eventually get done with the taxpayer advocate, assuming you have the proper documentation that we've been discussing here and that you cooperate with the taxpayer advocate. Probably not going to be a fast process. Could take 90 days. I've had cases take a year. The good news is once they do find that payment, you're going to get interest for the money. You're going to get credit back to the date that it was originally made, and then you're going to get interest as well. So if you have questions about this type of thing, or really anything having to do with the IRS or IRS problem resolution, I would suggest that you visit our website at getirshelp.com.